We just got a giant response from CD Projekt Red about the problems facing Cyberpunk 2077 and their role in that process. This is really the response, although we had things like some of those messages on Twitter and even some responses to articles made. This is the co-founder and joint CEO talking for 5 minutes about, in his view, what went wrong, who's at fault, how it happened, and actually laying out a timeline as to how things are going to get fixed in the future. There's a lot to break down with this video. I think at first glance, if you just watch this on Twitter, I could add a lot to it, because when you actually start to break down and analyze some of the statements being made, I started to take a bit more issue with the video overall, but in general, I have mixed feelings on this one, which we'll get into now. And they've even actually commented on some other things like the Sony situation with the game getting removed from the store and the refund situation, as well as how some content is actually getting delayed, which is kind of confirmed by this, but not explicitly mentioned. So right off the bat, I think they start off extremely strong with this video, where they say issues with the console version of the game are this person's fault, that being the co-founder and joint CEO, and leadership's fault overall. That us as fans, us as the community surrounding the game, should not fault the teams working on the game for some of the problems we saw in release, and how the board are the people making the final decisions. They were the people who chose to release the game in the state it finds itself in. But they do also say they did not intend for anything like what we saw happen with the extreme bugginess, especially on last-gen consoles, to happen with the game, which isn't exactly shocking that they didn't intend for the game to be buggy. And as it stands right now, they are working towards regaining our trust as a community, as fans of their games. So I think this started off extremely strong, which is probably intentional. This is exactly the type of response you want to see. It's not the company's fault, it's our fault. We chose to do this, and we were the people that could have made sure this didn't end up happening. But unfortunately, as much as I think it starts off really good, as he starts to get into the hows and whys of this situation, it almost feels like, in a way, it doesn't actually support this initial statement. So in the next section, they get into the how did CD Projekt let the game release in this buggy state, or how did it happen in general? So as far as from a technical perspective, they mention how there's a lot of stuff going on in Cyberpunk 2077. There's an extremely dense city with no load screens and all kinds of things happening in front of you and even at points above you or below you. This a big contrast to a rather open, flat terrain, kind of like what you saw in The Witcher 3. They mention how they knew there would be some restrictions or limitations with consoles, but in general, they underestimated the task of bringing this game to consoles. They knew the hardware gap existed, of course, but they didn't respect it enough. And really, they blame the main culprit as to why exactly this game has so many performance issues as some of the streaming systems being used on old gen. So basically, as data is streamed to your screen, all those various things happening, those older consoles have a slower bandwidth, meaning that basically if you had a big hose streaming all that data on the old gen consoles, that hose is a little bit thinner. Less data can go through it at a single time, and that's what they blame as the main culprit for some of these issues that pop up in reality. And then to make things even worse, just from the development overall, the game was first and foremost developed to look amazing on PC, which it definitely does, especially when there isn't any bugs, which in my experience now is pretty often. I've run into fairly minor bugs on PC, and the game looks phenomenal. So then going from this and trying to get it to work on a 7-year-old Xbox One definitely proved to be pretty difficult for them. And the fact that they went from this to trying to get it to work on an Xbox seems to be part of the reason why it didn't end up working out all that well. But then we have the line that I may take the most issue with in this video overall. In the video, he does say this:
every change and improvement needed to be tested, and as it turned out, our testing did not show a big part of the issues you experienced while playing the game. As we got closer to the final release, we saw significant improvements each and every day, and we really believed we would deliver in the final Day Zero update.
And to even just expand on that a little bit, they actually had a Q&A to go along with this video going live, where they said, didn't you test old gen consoles to keep tabs on the experience? We did. As it turned out, our testing did not show many of the issues you experienced while playing the game. As we got closer to launch, we saw significant improvements each and every day, and we really believed we'd deliver in the final Day Zero update. So maybe it's just me, but it almost feels like they're saying two different things. In the first half, mentioning how in their testing, they didn't actually see a lot of the issues that ended up popping up on old gen consoles. But then secondly, almost that we really tried to fix everything and we thought we could or did fix everything. We really believe we deliver. But like, if you didn't see those issues, if you weren't aware of the issues, in what way did you believe you would deliver? You were going to fix issues that you didn't know existed? That just doesn't make any sense. And also just this first line that, as it turned out, our testing did not show many of the issues you experience while playing the game. I just don't understand how that's true. Is one Xbox One different than another Xbox One? Or is this PS4 that this guy's playing on significantly different than the PS4s they were testing it on? This is a horrible response, basically stating that the game was so buggy because we didn't realize those bugs existed, or in our testing, those bugs didn't happen. No, you could definitely make that argument for something like the PC version on a high-end PC. Like, I was fortunate enough to play it with a 3080. I ran into minor bugs here or there, but nothing super game-breaking. So maybe there I could be like, all right, maybe they were playing on a different type of PC and they didn't run into some of these bugs that I did. Sure. But when you look at just the sheer amount of bugginess there is on consoles, or even just the low FPS overall, you're saying you didn't experience those problems? How different is one console to the other? How are so many consumers experiencing this, but they didn't? To me, it seems like a complete nonsense line, and in fact, I would say one of the reasons they are saying this line is because some of the ongoing, or really starting out, lawsuits. The lawsuits are claiming that investors lost money because CD Projekt did not accurately represent the game to them. So if they say here, oh yeah, by the way, we did know the game was going to run way worse on consoles, that would be a huge problem, because that would mean they did mislead investors. Instead, they're trying to say many of the issues people experienced didn't show up in their testing, so that's why it wasn't communicated to investors or to people overall. Then you also have the reality where the Xbox One and PS4 never had gameplay footage released. So overall, with this statement, both the first half of it and the second half of it, and this kind of builds off what is said in the video, I just don't buy it. It seems like complete nonsense to me and a total throwaway line. And taking it in with the context of this overall message, I think it actually degrades the message in general. They start off by saying that the issues with the console version are the leadership's fault, like the buck stops there, but then later on they're saying that our testing didn't even show those issues, so you're taking fault, but you're also then saying, well, we didn't even really know about some of them, so how much at fault could they be? Then they go into the review key section where they break down their review key process and why exactly console review codes didn't go out, or apparently went out really late. They mention how they started sending out review codes in the first days of December, and they actually during this part mentioned being very proud of the PC version of the game. Nothing there was really an explanation or an excuse, they were just kind of giving a description of that situation. But then as far as the console review codes, they explain how each day of development for consoles they saw some major improvements. So day to day the console version of the game was getting huge upgrades. As a result, console review codes kept getting pushed back later and later for a better version of the game, until console review codes eventually were sent out apparently on the 8th. So now the vast majority of media outlets did not get a console review code. They say here they went out on the 8th, but you could look up many reviews. Many reviewers requested a console review code and never got one, including me. They explained that part of the issues with this definitely came from the remote work, but overall with the whole review code situation, I also don't feel like this is a full picture on some of the problems. Like even with the PC review code situation, sending out review codes only about 5 to 7 days before the review embargo lifts for a game of this scale is kind of insane. That's a very short review period in general for a AAA game, and way shorter than that of The Witcher 3. They mentioned being proud of the PC version, but they also created a very odd review situation with the PC version. People either had to grind very hard each day to have a comprehensive review, which of course is not going to always lead to the best results. If you're sitting there playing a game 10 hours to 14 hours a day for 5 days in a row, at a certain point you might start having a little bit less fun with it and it might impact your review, or you have an incomplete review, and even further, the initial reviews were not allowed to include gameplay. No mention of that here either, which was another kind of sketchy thing where the gameplay embargo was separate from the review embargo. And none of this addresses the fact that they were extremely selective with who received review keys. That isn't inherently a bad thing. Maybe they wanted to avoid leaks, so they're only sending it out to more trusted sources, but the review situation had a lot of issues. I was fortunate enough to get a review code for this game, and I actually got my review code 30 minutes before the gameplay embargo lifted. So the gameplay embargo lifted on the Wednesday, where the game released later that day. It lifted at 6 a.m. I got an email unlocking my review copy at 5:30 a.m. with 30 minutes notice. And the official website that we were supposed to go to with terminals to actually request a review code kept saying that, hey, we never received keys from CD Projekt, so we can't send them out yet. So it definitely seems like there were some other oddities going on with the review situation. But in fairness to CDPR, Obviously, they probably don't want to get into all of that in this video. Some of that wouldn't have been appropriate to get into with this video, made for investors, made for mass audiences. So I'm not completely faulting them for that, but I also think they didn't really address some of the backlash or controversy the review code situation created. They kind of glossed over some of the bad parts of it and don't really mention changing this behavior for the future. But then they definitely ended off on another strong note. They do say how we should expect bigger and smaller patches on a regular basis going forward, and how the next update will be coming out within the next 10 days. That will likely be the January update they talked about in the past. Then in the ensuing weeks following this next update, there will be another larger one, so that will likely be the February update they mentioned in the past. And it basically seems like perhaps the January update will be a bit smaller in scale, where the February update could be the biggest one we've seen thus far. On this situation, I think that's good. I imagine a lot of people at CDPR took off for the holiday, as they definitely earned it. They just came off a big crunch period. I know though that may be less than ideal for consumers. I totally get it, and I think the devs definitely deserved a break. So this first update being smaller doesn't really bother me, and it'll really be one of those things that time will tell. It depends how much these two updates fix. It'll then be several months since the game released. How buggy or how well does it run on base last gen consoles? If it's still a disaster, then obviously this isn't a super good thing, but if they do make significant improvements, I would say this is very positive. But then also they expand with how the long-term support for the game hasn't changed, and they actually post up this roadmap, kinda. We knew about a lot of this, but it gives us some more concrete timelines, sort of. So they mention how first they're going to be fixes and updates. They're going to be their initial focus, and they kind of move some of the DLC till after the fixes and updates. It almost sounds like perhaps some of the DLC could be done already, but they don't want to release it before the fixes and updates, which is pretty respectable. I agree with them on that position. You don't want DLCs coming out when the game isn't properly working yet, although the DLC being done part's just speculation by me, we have no idea. And then how the next gen update is coming in the second half of 2021, so likely in Q4 or Q3 after the end of summer. And this roadmap is good. It's pretty loose in that we don't really get a ton of new information from it. It doesn't actually give us many dates, but they do reassure we'll hear more in the coming months. I think it definitely is pretty good that they're focusing on fixes and patches before DLCs again and before some of that new content. So people that are unable to play the game, like if you have a PlayStation copy, you can actually get to play it before people who already beat it get new content. And actually something that seems to be almost confirmed as a result of this is expansions have been delayed or just not coming until 2022. So CD Projekt actually differentiates between DLC and expansions, as DLC being much smaller free DLCs. So if we look at The Witcher 3, what they considered DLC for that game was the addition of things like New Game Plus, new finisher animations, a different style for Ciri. So I think all of this here is the free DLCs for Cyberpunk. The large-scale expansions adding in a wealth of new content like Blood and Wine, Hearts of Stone for The Witcher 3 will come later, but based off this roadmap, not come in 2021. And even as they touch on this in the Q&A section of their article, they do refer to it as the free DLC. So even a bit more evidence that that's what this is referring to, which isn't inherently a bad thing. I mean, between the actual worldwide pandemic and then now having to have way more of a focus and probably more time spent on bug fixing, it's not super surprising that some large-scale expansions will maybe pushed a little bit. And they actually end this off by saying that beyond Cyberpunk, they have many plans for the future which they will share when ready. So likely whatever the next Witcher project is that they have kind of confirmed they are working on. In the article itself, there are a couple of Q&A questions that aren't super revealing but do touch on things that weren't mentioned in the video. A really important one is, are you making the team crunch to work on the patches? And they confirm that the team is working to bring relevant fixes to the game without any obligatory overtime. Avoiding crunch on all of our future projects is one of our top priorities. So it's actually pretty good. It looks like these people are not crunching to get some of these fixes out. When is the game coming back to the PlayStation Store? We are working on fixes and updates and working with Sony to bring Cyberpunk 2077 back to the PlayStation Store as soon as possible. So it seems like they probably don't know. I would imagine it won't actually come back until after this February update, or the larger update that is mentioned, or at least that's the earliest it comes back. We have to see how much it fixes the game on the PS4 first, I think. And then finally, what is the status of the Help Me Refund initiative? The initiative is progressing according to plan, and we just sent out the first wave of reimbursements, that being the people who are hoping to get some refunds for the physical copies of the game. So overall with this one, I feel like it is on the cusp of being a great apology, but due to how it's worded or what's said, it kind of misses the mark a bit for me. The overall sentiment is great, especially that starting off point. The head of the company saying, we're the people at fault, direct the blame at us, and we're going to do better in the future. Our next priority is fixing this game. That is exactly what you want to hear. No BS, no nonsense. We're pushing back some of the DLCs. We're pushing back those paid expansions. At least it looks like that's what's happening. And we're focusing on making sure this product is ready and delivered for all of you, hoping to rebuild trust. That's great. And I actually think they did a really good job at mentioning all of that. But then when you actually get into their descriptions as to what went wrong or their explanations, that's where things start to fall apart a little bit for me. I feel like they're almost mischaracterizing the situation sometimes. Like with the review code situation, they don't mention part of what made that situation so frustrating for many consumers. If they don't recognize that as being one of the pressing problems, how will they fix it in the future? Then of course, just the whole response with them not running into the same problems on their console copies of the game. That is just complete nonsense to me. I do somewhat have sympathy for that particular statement because I imagine they have some serious red tape around what they could say as a result of the lawsuits, as a result of being a publicly traded company. The CEO here may have wanted to say, hey, look, we're sorry, we messed up, we should have not released the game when we did. We did know about some of these bugs and it was unprofessional or wrong of us to release the game, and that would be the good response. But that response could probably get him into a lot of legal trouble and actually potentially lose the company a lot of money in lawsuits. So I could definitely see a scenario where he literally can't say that. Of course, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but it's definitely something important to keep in mind. Overall, it's a decent response. I'm definitely excited for the future of this game. I'm still having a ton of fun of it. I'm having a ton of fun making videos on it. And I do really believe that CD Projekt will improve the game going forward. I have no doubts about that, but I think they could definitely start doing some better responses or self-analysis as to what went wrong and how they could fix that for their next game. With that said, hopefully you guys found this one informative. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. What do you think about this situation? What do you think about this response? But until next time, I thank you all again for watching, and I hope to see you all later.